May 7, 2026. Three U.S. guided missile destroyers were cutting through the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, moving from the strait toward the Gulf of Oman. The USS Truxtun in the lead. The USS Rafael Peralta directly behind. The USS Mason providing the rear protective envelope. All three were fully combat ready. All three had every defensive system active. And within hours of their transit, Iran made the decision that will be recorded as the single most consequential miscalculation in the history of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Hidden coastal launch ramps along the Iranian shoreline fired their payloads. Suicide drones filled the sky simultaneously from multiple vectors. Fast attack boats swarmed toward the American vessels in the coordinated harassment pattern Iran had rehearsed for decades. The IRGC had watched 3 American destroyers enter its operational zone and concluded that this was its moment. Its opportunity to demonstrate that the Strait of Hormuz remained under its control despite 68 days of Operation Epic Fury degrading its naval inventory. That conclusion was wrong. Every Iranian drone was shot down. Every anti-ship missile was intercepted. Every fast attack boat was shredded by the destroyer's close-in weapon systems and destroyed from the air by MH-60 Seahawk helicopters. Not one of the 3 American warships sustained any damage whatsoever. And within hours of the failed attack, as darkness settled over the Gulf, the sky echoed with the sound of American fighter jets. Explosions tore through Bandar Abbas. Qeshm Island surrendered to flames. The Siri coastal region was struck installation by installation. Bandar Kamir and Minab coastal facilities came under sustained precision fire. The IRGC had spent decades and billions of dollars turning Iran's 1,609-kilometer coastline into what its commanders called a complete kill zone. The United States military answered that designation by targeting every element of that kill zone simultaneously in a single night. It is not a question anymore of whether Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine can challenge American power in the Strait of Hormuz. The doctrine has been functionally erased. The coastline that was the kill zone is now the graveyard of the program that created it, and the one-page memorandum of understanding sitting on the diplomatic table through Pakistani channels is now not an offer, but an ultimatum with a deadline that the sound of explosions over Bandar Abbas has made unmistakably clear. But let's back all the way up. Because to understand why May 7th represents not just another strike in a conflict that has been producing significant strikes since February 28th, but a categorical threshold moment that has permanently altered the strategic geometry of the Strait of Hormuz, you need to understand what the IRGC was defending, why it chose this specific moment to engage 3 American destroyers, and what the systematic targeting of Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and the Siri naval base means for every military option the Iranian regime has left. Here is where we stand as of May 7th, 2026. The ceasefire that was announced on April 8th and that has been functioning as a heavily armed pause rather than a genuine cessation of hostilities has produced the following confirmed sequence of events in the past 72 hours. On May 4th and 5th, Iran launched 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and numerous drones against the United Arab Emirates. Major fires erupted in the Fujairah industrial zone. There were casualties. The UAE's petroleum industrial zone was struck. This was not a limited demonstration. This was a sustained multi-vector attack on a country that is America's most important Gulf partner, that has been proactively cooperating with the Treasury's asset freeze operation, and that has the Fujairah pipeline carrying 1.8 million barrels of UAE crude per day through a route that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Iran denied the attacks and claimed they were baseless. Then on May 7th, 3 U.S. destroyers transited the strait, and the IRGC launched a coordinated attack involving anti-ship missiles from coastal launch ramps, suicide drones descending from multiple vectors, and fast attack boats swarming toward the American vessels simultaneously. Every threat was eliminated. No American warship was damaged. And within hours, the United States military conducted the most comprehensive single-night strike operation against Iranian coastal military infrastructure since the conflict began. The ceasefire that was technically in place when all of this happened is now whatever labeled diplomatic language chooses to apply to an arrangement under which one side is launching ballistic missiles at Gulf states and attacking American destroyers with drones and fast attack boats. Now let me give you the full picture of what the IRGC launched on May 7th, because the specifics of its attack tell you something important about the organizational state of the command structure that authorized it. Anti-ship missiles fired from hidden coastal launch ramps along the Iranian shore. Multiple categories of suicide drones deployed simultaneously from different vectors designed to overwhelm close-in defensive systems by creating more simultaneous engagement requirements than any single defensive platform can manage. Fast attack boats organized in the swarming pattern that IRGC doctrine calls its signature maritime asymmetric tactic, racing toward the American vessels at full speed from multiple directions intended to split defensive attention and close to engagement range before the destroyer's weapons can eliminate the entire swarm. That is the full tactical package of Iran's maritime asymmetric doctrine deployed against 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers with full air cover from USS George H.W. Bush and USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group aircraft. And here is what that attack produced. Every drone was shot down. Every anti-ship missile was intercepted. Every fast attack boat was destroyed. Trump described the drones falling into the sea with characteristic directness, comparing them to the death of butterflies. The close-in weapon systems aboard the destroyers responded to the aerial threats with the autonomous targeting efficiency that makes the phalanx system specifically lethal against exactly this category of threat. The 5-inch Mk-45 guns eliminated the surface threats. The MH-60 Seahawks, already airborne from the ships, destroyed the remaining boat threats with air-to-surface missiles before they could close to effective weapons range. The entire coordinated multi-vector attack, the culmination of decades of IRGC maritime doctrine development, was completely defeated with 0 American casualties and 0 American vessel damage. And Trump's response was not a press conference calling for restraint. It was, just like we knocked them out again today, we will knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they do not get their deal signed fast. Now let me give you the retaliatory strike in the full operational detail it demands, because what the United States military did to Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and the Siri naval base in the hours after the failed IRGC attack is the most comprehensive single-night destruction of Iranian coastal military infrastructure in this entire conflict. Let me start with the logistics that made it possible, because the operational architecture that sustained this strike through multiple waves deserves the analytical attention it has not received. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates was the heart of the operation. More than 5 refueling aircraft took off simultaneously and created what was essentially a fuel bridge across the Gulf sky. Massive stratotanker aircraft from Al Dhafra circled in looping patterns over the Gulf, feeding the fighter jets operating over Iranian territory and allowing them to loiter over targets for hours rather than the minutes that fuel constraints would otherwise allow. This aerial logistics network is the specific capability that enables sustained precision strike operations rather than single-pass raids. While Iranian military planners modeled an American strike as a wave of attacks lasting minutes, the aerial tanker bridge allowed American aircraft to remain overhead for hours, methodically working through target lists with the deliberateness of a sustained strategic campaign rather than the urgency of a retaliatory raid. The USS George H.W. Bush launched its aircraft. The USS Abraham Lincoln was in full support position. EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets completely blinded Iranian radar systems, leaving Iranian air defense operators staring at white noise on their screens rather than the incoming aircraft. F-35 stealth jets moved over targets like ghosts. F-A-18 Super Hornets delivered precision munitions against specific targets within each target complex. A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft were held in readiness for low-altitude strikes against any surface threats that emerged. Every link in the air operations chain was in place before the first weapon was released. And then the systematic destruction of Iran's coastal military infrastructure began. Bandar Abbas was the first target and the most symbolically significant. This is not just a port city. It is the main headquarters of the Iranian Navy and IRGC naval forces, a command center from which nearly 150 vessels have been directed and lost during this conflict. Its deep water ports served for years as the incubation center of Iran's asymmetric maritime warfare tactics. The Jamaran and Sahand frigates, which represent the most capable surface combatants remaining in the Iranian naval inventory, were commanded from Bandar Abbas. The city was known within the IRGC as the heart of Hormuz. All naval operations in the strait were managed from this center. American missiles turned the logistics depots and command centers to ashes within seconds. The massive coastal missile batteries at Bandar Abbas were rendered completely inoperable. The coastal anti-ship missile launch ramps that had been scanning the strait for targets were wiped from the map. The hidden silos containing silkworm and sunburn anti-ship missiles were targeted. The guidance centers for deadly anti-ship missiles, including the C-801, were struck. The SSN-22 Sunburn radar network that had been scanning the strait for years was shredded by precision munitions in seconds. The command infrastructure that coordinated every IRGC naval operation from fast attack boat deployments to mine-laying operations to the attack on the 3 destroyers was eliminated. Bandar Abbas, the heart of IRGC naval power, was systematically destroyed in the same night that the doctrine it housed was being defeated on the water. Qeshm Island, the second major target, was a military geography of far greater complexity than its historical identity as a tourist destination suggested. The largest island in the Persian Gulf, covering an area of 1,445 square kilometers, Qeshm had been transformed from a civilian destination into what intelligence assessments describe as a massive underground missile city hidden beneath the island's terrain. Lethal arsenals sat just a few hundred meters beneath the shores that once welcomed visitors. Kilometers of concrete tunnels dug underground were filled with missiles, guidance systems, drone engines, and the explosive materials required to arm and launch them. These tunnels created what the IRGC marketed as an impenetrable underground fortress that dominated the strait from within the strait itself. The island functioned as a stationary aircraft carrier anchored at the most strategically advantageous position in the entire Hormuz geography. Launch ramps for Shahed-136 kamikaze drones were positioned across the island, waiting in the dark for activation orders. The hidden silos of Ghadir and Nasser-1 missiles were embedded in the island's terrain. Khizr ballistic missile positions were concealed in the underground passages that honeycombed the island's rock. The strike on Qeshm was not a single attack on a single target. It was a sustained campaign of precision munitions delivered against multiple hardened positions across an island-wide military infrastructure complex. Precision-guided bombs permanently sealed the entrances of the underground tunnels. Hidden radar bases that had been scanning the Gulf from elevated positions on the island were completely destroyed by JDAM munitions. The launch infrastructure for the drone swarms that had been a constant threat to commercial shipping and American naval assets was eliminated installation by installation. The fall of Qeshm fundamentally shook Iran's ability to project force from within the strait itself, because Qeshm was the cork in the bottle of Iran's strait control strategy, and that cork has now been removed by American precision munitions. The Siri region represents the newest and strategically most sophisticated element in Iran's coastal defense network, and its destruction in this operation carries implications that go beyond the physical military hardware lost. The Shahid Rabbani naval base at Siri was opened in 2020 specifically to control the eastern entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, providing coverage of ships approaching the strait from the Gulf of Oman direction. This base was the IRGC's eastern gateway and intelligence hub, the facility whose radars provided early warning of any vessel approaching from the Oman side before it reached the more confined waters where the IRGC's fast attack boat and mining operations were most effective. Every ship approaching the strait from the Gulf of Oman was first detected and tracked from Siri. The base's radars and intelligence nodes provided the tactical picture that allowed IRGC commanders to decide which vessels to allow through, which to interdict, which to demand million-dollar transit tolls from, and which to target with whatever weapons were appropriate to the tactical situation. The destruction of Siri's coastal defense systems and radar nodes means the IRGC has lost its early warning capability on the eastern approaches to the strait. What was Iran's most important intelligence and surveillance node for strait operations is now a blind spot. Ships approaching from the Gulf of Oman are no longer being detected and tracked by IRGC systems before they enter the narrower waters of the strait. The asymmetric defense chain's most critical early warning link has been severed. Now let me give you what was actually happening diplomatically at the exact moment the IRGC decided to attack the three destroyers, because the timing of the attack against the diplomatic context it occurred in reveals something crucial about the command structure that authorized it. The United States had presented Iran with a one-page memorandum of understanding through Pakistani diplomatic channels. This document was delivered secretly and represented, in the Trump administration's framing, a final honorable exit for the Iranian regime. The one-page MOU included specific conditions, a 30-day negotiation process to be launched immediately, the immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the complete restraint of all proxy groups and militant networks, including a sharp cutoff of funding to Hezbollah and all other Iranian-backed forces in the region, and the complete halt of the nuclear program. Iran was in the process of evaluating this offer. A final response was expected within 24 hours. Pakistani diplomats were focused on receiving Tehran's definitive answer. And in that specific 24-hour window, while Pakistan was waiting for the response, the IRGC launched its attack on the three American destroyers transiting the strait. Read that sequence carefully. The United States extended a final diplomatic offer through Pakistan. Pakistan was awaiting Tehran's response within 24 hours. The IRGC answered that diplomatic window by launching anti-ship missiles, suicide drones, and fast attack boat swarms at three American warships. That is not a negotiating tactic. That is an organizational demonstration that the entity controlling Iran's operational military decisions, the IRGC command structure, has not accepted the premise that a negotiated settlement is the appropriate outcome of this confrontation. The civilian government may have been evaluating the one-page MOU. The IRGC answered it with a weapons launch. Now let me tell you what White House spokesperson Carolyn Leavitt said after the retaliatory strikes, because the language the administration used in the immediate aftermath tells you the precise terms that have been established for what comes next. She stated that if Iran does not understand it has been militarily defeated, it will be hit harder than it has ever been hit before. Read that. Not harder than it has been hit recently. Harder than it has ever been hit before. That language establishes a ceiling for what has occurred so far and places everything that has happened in 68 days of Operation Epic Fury, including the 5 attacks on Natanz, the 40-plus bunker busters that turned Isfahan's underground complex into a chain reaction inferno, the systematic dismantling of Iran's missile production chain, and now the destruction of Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and Siri, as below the threshold of what harder than it has ever been hit before represents. The administration is saying publicly that the destructive capacity it has employed to date is not the full weight of what is available, that the one-page MOU is the last diplomatic exit, that the alternative to accepting it is something beyond what has been delivered so far, and that Trump's statement, "We will knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they do not get their deal signed fast," is not rhetorical. It is a precise description of the options that CENTCOM has placed on the table at the White House. Now let me give you the full picture of what Iran's leadership believed happened in the hours after the strike, because the confusion inside Tehran in the immediate aftermath of the operation reveals the depth of the command fragmentation that has been documented throughout this analysis. In the first hours after the massive explosions tore through Bandar Abbas, Qeshm, and Siri, Iranian commanders whose communication with command centers had been cut by the strikes were effectively operating blind. The Tehran administration's initial response was to search for signs that the attacks had been carried out by the United Arab Emirates rather than directly by American forces. This was not an irrational conclusion. Just 2 days earlier, on May 4th and 5th, Iran had launched 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and numerous drones at the UAE. The fires in the Fujairah industrial zone from those attacks were still burning. Iranian commanders, their radar systems blinded by Growler electronic warfare, their communications severed by the precision strikes on command centers, their ability to identify incoming aircraft eliminated by the same electronic warfare architecture that blinded Bandar Abbas's radar network, concluded in the confusion of the aftermath that the explosions must be UAE retaliation for the missile attacks Iran had just conducted against it. The UAE's defense ministry simply watched the events in silence and made no statement. When the fires died down, and the full picture of what had been destroyed emerged, the painful clarity that it was American power, not Emirati, that had reached every major node of the IRGC's coastal defense network simultaneously in a single night settled over the Iranian command structure. Iranian state media outlets responded with the tool they always reach for when reality contradicts the official narrative. Fars and Tasnim attempted to portray the massive explosions as routine air defense exercises. The regime claimed civilian areas had been hit without producing evidence. In reality, only strategic military infrastructure was destroyed. The propaganda effort was covering the operational catastrophe beneath it. Let me now give you the specific operational numbers that frame the complete strategic picture. 1,609 kilometers. The length of Iran's coastline that the IRGC had been designing as a complete kill zone through the network of islands, launch ramps, radar stations, underground missile cities, and command infrastructure at Bandar Abbas, Qeshm, Siri, Larak, Abu Musa, and dozens of intermediate facilities. 150. The approximate number of naval vessels Iran has lost during this conflict, with Bandar Abbas as the command center for all of them. 1.8 million barrels per day. The volume of UAE crude moving through the Fujairah pipeline bypass, the route that Iran's attack on UAE infrastructure specifically targeted on May 4th and 5th, and that the destruction of the Iranian coastline's anti-ship missile network now protects more effectively than before. 12 ballistic missiles plus 3 cruise missiles plus numerous drones. The scale of the Iranian attack on the UAE 2 days before the destroyer engagement that created the context within which Tehran initially misidentified the American retaliatory strikes as UAE retaliation. 0. The number of American warships damaged in the May 7th IRGC multi-vector attack on 3 U.S. destroyers. 24 hours. The diplomatic window within which the one-page MOU response was expected from Tehran at the moment the IRGC launched its attack. And 1 page. The length of the final American diplomatic offer that Iran's military faction answered with weapons instead of words. Now let me bring the 3-track convergence into the complete picture, because May 7th is the day when every track arrived simultaneously at the same operational threshold and produced an outcome that changes every subsequent calculation by every party in this conflict. Financial track. The blockade has cost Iran between $400 and $500 million per day since April 13th. Karg Island's storage ceiling is approaching. The 6-week countdown to forced well shutdown is running. The one-page MOU's demand for immediate strait opening is the only diplomatic mechanism available that could relieve the financial pressure before the storage ceiling is reached. The IRGC attacked the 3 destroyers rather than allowing the diplomatic window to produce the MOU response. The financial clock is running through the diplomatic implosion at exactly the same rate it was running before. Military track. Bandar Abbas destroyed. Qeshm Island's underground missile network struck. Siri naval base radar and intelligence infrastructure eliminated. 150 Iranian naval vessels lost total in this conflict. The coastal anti-ship missile network along the Hormuz shoreline systematically targeted in the retaliatory operation. Every Iranian anti-ship missile fired on May 7th intercepted. Every drone shot down. Every fast attack boat eliminated. The military track has now reached the specific threshold where the IRGC's primary remaining offensive capability, the coastal defense doctrine it spent decades building across its 1,609-kilometer kill zone, has been functionally dismantled in a single retaliatory operation. Internal collapse track. The IRGC made the decision to attack the 3 destroyers during a 24-hour diplomatic window, overriding whatever calculation the civilian diplomatic faction was making about the one-page MOU. The attack was not authorized by whoever was evaluating the MOU through Pakistani channels. It was authorized by the faction that has decided regime survival depends on continued confrontation rather than negotiated settlement. The confusion in the immediate aftermath, the misidentification of American strikes as UAE retaliation, the propaganda immediately deployed to cover the operational catastrophe, and the White House spokesperson's statement that Iran will be hit harder than it has ever been hit before if it does not understand it has been militarily defeated, all confirm that the internal collapse of coherent decision-making has now reached the point where the organization controlling operational military decisions is making choices that contradict and undermine the diplomatic track simultaneously. Here is the honest strategic assessment of what May 7th means for every subsequent development in this conflict. The IRGC deployed its complete maritime asymmetric tactical package against 3 American destroyers. Everything it had, in the coordinated form it had rehearsed, in the waters where it believed its geography advantage was greatest. Anti-ship missiles from coastal launch ramps, suicide drone swarms from multiple vectors, fast attack boat harassment from coordinated swarm positions. The result was 0 American casualties, 0 American vessel damage, and the retaliatory destruction of Bandar Abbas, Qeshm Island, and the Siri naval base within hours. There is no analytical framework available that produces a different result if the same attack is attempted again with the remaining assets. The destroyers are the same. The defensive systems are the same. The Seahawks are the same. The Growlers that blind Iranian radars are the same. And the coastal infrastructure that was generating the attack has been significantly degraded by the retaliatory operation. The IRGC's maritime doctrine has been proven to fail against this specific force package in the specific geography it was designed for, in the specific conditions it was designed to operate under. The doctrine is not inadequate because of a tactical mistake. The doctrine is inadequate because the technology and force package it was designed to challenge have evolved beyond what the doctrine can address. Fast attack boats moving at any speed cannot survive contact with Seahawk helicopters armed with Hellfire missiles operating from platforms the boats cannot effectively target. Anti-ship missiles fired from launch ramps whose radar guidance has been blinded by Growler electronic warfare cannot find their targets through the electronic noise. The doctrine was designed for a different era's adversary. It is being tested against this era's most capable naval force. The results of that test are visible in the explosions over Bandar Abbas and the fires on Qeshm Island. The IRGC's last remaining operational asymmetric cards, the underwater mining capability, the residual coastal missile positions that survived the retaliatory strikes, and the potential activation of the Houthi proxy in Yemen to threaten Bab el-Mandeb simultaneously, are being held against the backdrop of a one-page MOU that demands their permanent surrender as the condition of ending the conflict. The MOU's requirements, immediate strait opening, proxy restraint and funding cutoff, complete halt of the nuclear program, constitute the precise elimination of every remaining card in the IRGC's hand. Accepting the MOU means the IRGC loses the strait as an operational instrument, it loses the proxy network as a force projection mechanism, and it loses the nuclear program as the ultimate insurance policy. The IRGC cannot accept those terms without eliminating the 3 pillars of its institutional relevance simultaneously, which is why the IRGC faction controlling operational military decisions answered the 24-hour MOU window with anti-ship missiles and drone swarms rather than a diplomatic response. And which is why the White House spokesperson's statement that Iran will be hit harder than it has ever been hit before has now arrived as the direct consequence of that choice. The structural risk that sits beneath the tactical clarity of what happened on May 7th is the one that no military operation can resolve and that the diplomatic track has not yet found an answer for. The IRGC's institutional survival calculus and the Iranian people's survival calculus are not the same calculation. The IRGC's survival requires maintaining the 3 pillars the MOU demands they surrender. The Iranian people's survival requires relief from the blockade that is filling the Karg Island storage tanks toward the ceiling that forces well shutdown and permanent revenue destruction. The IRGC is making operational decisions that protect its institutional position, while those decisions accelerate the economic destruction of the country it nominally serves. The civilian leadership that evaluated the MOU through Pakistani channels does not control the military faction that answered it with weapons. And the gap between those 2 decision-making centers is the specific gap that has made every previous diplomatic breakthrough in this conflict fail at the moment of implementation. A deal that gets agreed to by the foreign minister gets contradicted by the IRGC within hours. A diplomatic window that Pakistan is using to carry a final offer gets answered by a weapons launch. The one-page MOU is on the table. The answer that came from Tehran on May 7th was written in the sky over Bandar Abbas by American precision munitions rather than in diplomatic language through Pakistani intermediaries. And the next response, described by the White House as harder than anything Iran has ever experienced before, is waiting behind the one-page document for the moment that window officially closes. The coastline that was the kill zone is now the map of targets the retaliatory operation has only partially addressed. Bandar Abbas destroyed. Qeshm struck. Siri blinded. And every remaining coastal installation that the IRGC still controls is now on a target list that has been demonstrably executed in the same night that the IRGC made the last operational mistake available to it. The one-page offer is on the table. The 24-hour window is expired. And the question that nobody in Tehran's bunkers or Washington's situation rooms can answer with certainty is whether the faction that answered the diplomatic window with weapons has the institutional authority to stop what it has started before the administration that promised harder than ever before makes that promise operational. Drop your predictions in the comments. Does the regime accept the one-page MOU, or does the next phase of this conflict make everything that has happened so far look like the opening act? Subscribe and turn on notifications. Bandar Abbas is on fire. Qeshm's underground cities are sealed. Syria is blind. And the one-page document is still on the table waiting for an answer that the IRGC has already given in the language it knows best. We will see you in the next one.